How you doing, everyone? Welcome back. This is Elliot right here. He's kind of a nutcase. This guy, he is living proof that the Earth is indeed round. If the Earth was flat, this guy very specifically would have already knocked everything off of it by now. And you're going to see him do what he does, I'm sure. He's going to come perch up here on my shoulder, and he's not going to just jump off like he normally does. Normally he'll go flying off in that direction. But anyway, Elliot is not the point of this video. This video was actually inspired by a comment on a previous video. In fact, J.R. Sibley 99 is the person who made that comment. And it was the video about homelessness being a capital offense. Right? And what J.R. Sibley mentioned was, basically all the flaws in the idea of jailing the homeless. And also brought up the issue of privately owned prisons. Private prisons, for-profit prisons. And that's what we're going to talk about, is the for-profit private prisons. Right? Why should we have them? Why should we not have them? I mean, some people like to argue that, well, it's a cost-saving measure for the state. Is it? Not really. I mean, it just spreads the payments out over time. It's almost like your credit card payment, right? You want to go spend $500 on whatever it is that you might spend $500 on. You're going to put it on your credit card, right? Well, you can pay that off, $50 a month or whatever. Or a car. You bought a car on credit, right? $30,000, $40,000 car. You may not be able to pull $30,000, $40,000 out of your pocket, but you can come up with $500 a month, right? So that's one of the reasons that private prisons are used. It's an accounting trick, actually. It looks on paper like it costs less, even though it really doesn't. Just like that car. You drop your, let's just say $35,000 on a car, right? You drop that $35,000 right now, and that's it. That's all you pay for the car. But if you buy it on credit, and you're making payments over several years, $35,000 just became $40,000. So you're actually paying more for it. But let's also look at some of the issues with private prisons. Okay. First of all, 28 states use private prisons. I happen to be in a state that does not use private prisons. Here in Iowa, we do not have them. But across the river in Illinois, they do. And up north in Minnesota, they do not. South of me in Missouri, they do not. South Dakota, I believe, does, whereas Nebraska does not. Montana, they have, you might as well say half of their prison population is in private prisons. That's the highest number. All right, that is the highest number, right? Montana has the highest percentage of incarcerated people in private prisons. Some states are as high as 25 to 30%. Some states are less than 10%, right? An average is probably around, and I haven't actually crunched the numbers on this. I mean, this is just me kind of looking and kind of ballparking it in my head. I mean, if you remove Montana and their extremely high rate of private prison incarcerations, the average is probably around 15% or so that are in private prisons of the states that use those. And again, that's just kind of running numbers in my head. I haven't actually confirmed those numbers. I haven't actually, that's just kind of a ballpark estimate based on the numbers that I did see. But those numbers are less important than the overall point that I'm making here. Private prisons. Should we use them? Should we not? Well, they're not cost effective. They're just not. They're not as secure as public prisons. They are not as secure as the ones that are run by the state. They have more violations of, more infractions of the rules and regulations governing the prison. They have more contraband that gets in. The guards are not as well trained, and they're not as well paid. So you've got, your private prison guards. If you're a private prison guard and you're watching this, you don't make as much as someone at a public prison. And you don't have as much training. The recidivism rate is higher for private prisons. So higher recidivism rate, more infractions while they're in there. They're less secure. There are actually more escape attempts from private prisons. So this notion that the private sector can just do it better, in some cases that's true. When it comes to prisons, it is not. Recidivism rate, like I said, that's higher. There's no nominal effect on crime rate. For example, Tennessee and Missouri, for example. Missouri does not have private prisons. Tennessee does. Crime rates are effectively the same. I mean, roughly. I mean, they're close enough that we're going to call them the same. And those are pretty similar states in that they are in the same general geographical area, roughly the same kind of ballparks, population. They're kind of not that far off from each other. They are both, well, I did a video about high crime cities, and each of those has one of the top 10 cities for crime. Memphis and St. Louis, of course. So there's no real effect on the crime rate. The recidivism rate is higher for private prisons. Guards are paid less. They're not trained as well. No real cost to the state, or no real cost benefit to the state. No real cost benefit to the state. And also, private prisons, they have that profit motive, right? Just like any other business. I mean, I have a business myself. Am I driven by profit? Yes. Yes, I am. I mean, that's not my only driving factor, of course, but yeah, I do it to make a profit so that I can make a living, right? So, how do prisons make their money? Well, they contract through the state, and they, prison sentences are longer. And this is, in a private prison, the sentences are longer than they are in a public prison. And this isn't like, you take Iowa that has no public prisons compared to Illinois, or that has no private prisons, excuse me. Iowa has no private prisons, whereas Illinois does have private prisons. It's not that, Illinois has longer sentences because of the difference in the two states, right? It's that those that are in the private prisons in Illinois are serving longer sentences than those in the public prisons in Illinois, right? And I'm just using that as a just a neighboring state of mind, right? We could also say, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, they all use private prisons. So does Texas. I want to say Nevada does. I'm not 100% sure on that. But yeah, some of the states in the Northeast do. I want to say Vermont does, but the others don't. Or maybe it's New Hampshire that does and the others don't. But yeah, I mean, longer sentences, less humane conditions, right? They just want to pack them in, right? They just want to pack in as many people as they can. Therefore, incarceration rates are higher. right? So you take states that have very similar laws on the same offenses, right? More people will be, and I'm going back to Montana on this because they've got, almost half of their population. I might as well say it's 49%, so you might as well say half, right? Half of their prison population is in private prisons, right? So they have a higher percentage of their population incarcerated than, say, for example, Kansas, that does not use private prisons. Right? So you have higher incarceration rates because they need to fill those beds. You have longer sentences, and you can debate whether or not that's a good thing or a bad thing. I would tend to think that, that there's an argument to be made for early release in some circumstances, right? You get a 10-year sentence, right? If you're in a private prison, you're serving out that 10 years. I mean, whereas in a public prison, you might get a little bit of time off, right? You might get that knocked down to 8, for good behavior or whatnot. And we can debate whether or not that's a good idea, right? But in a private prison, you're not getting out early. Public prison, you might, right? The private prisons are not focused on reducing recidivism. Basically, they just want to lock you up and that's it. Whereas in public prisons, they want to help you not come back. They don't want you back. The private prisons, hell yeah, they want you back. So we are incentivizing making criminals worse than they really are, right? Which is not to say that we don't have bad crime, of course, because I'm sorry, you kill somebody, a murderer needs to be locked up and never let out. Okay? So before you go saying that I'm all soft on crime or whatnot, a murderer needs to be locked up and never let out. Pedophile, lock him up, never let him out. Some would argue the death penalty, and I would emotionally agree with you on that, but logically disagree because there have been too many cases where someone has posthumously been exonerated after they've already been executed. So there have been too many cases where we've executed the wrong person. Too many cases where DNA evidence has overturned death row convictions. So on an emotional level, I'm with you on the death penalty because there are certain things that, we just can't have you in society anymore. But, like I said, actually thinking about it, and I actually oppose it. But yeah, so I'm not one of these soft on crime bleeding hearts, right? What I am saying, though, is we shouldn't be looking for more crime than there actually is. We shouldn't be looking for more reasons to lock people up. We should be looking for ways to keep people out of our prisons, keep them out of any legal trouble at all, really. But let's try to keep people out of the prisons. And we don't do that by privatizing them, because now we give them that profit motive, and now the prison owners are there lobbying. They're lobbying to get the laws that they want in order to keep their business running. Because if we actually try to do something about crime that would actually rehabilitate offenders, and if we would actually focus on rehabilitation, I mean, yes, we need to focus on punishment, but we also need to focus on rehabilitation. We can do both. Okay? We can do both. So let's try to rehabilitate our criminals. Yes, there's going to be some recidivism. That's just built in, you know. I mean, that's just the way it is. But let's do what we can to reduce the recidivism rates. And let's, instead of using taxpayers to fund private businesses, you know what? Why aren't the taxpayers funding my business? You know, I mean, is that fair that, you know, that their business gets paid for by the taxpayers and mine doesn't? Yeah, well, I tell you what, let's get rid of the private prisons, close them down, right? And let's actually work on reforming the criminal justice system in a way that, yes, punishes criminal behavior, but at the same time makes an attempt to rehabilitate those who do offend, so that we're not sending them back. And so that we don't have a profit motive to keep people locked up, or a profit motive to lock up people who otherwise wouldn't have been, or who maybe they deserve to be let out a little bit early. You know, maybe it's a, like I said, that I used a 10-year sentence example, right? Let's just say, you know, 5 years for petty theft, right? 5 years for petty theft. Yeah, you're not going to get out for, you know, you're not going to get out in 4 in a private prison. Also, if somebody's eligible for parole, if someone is eligible for parole, they're not going to get it in the private prison. I mean, it's not that they won't get it, it's just a lot harder to get in a private prison. But you know what? That's the profit motive for you, right? And like I said, business owner myself, I have nothing against profits. But maybe some things shouldn't be done for profit. And by the way, Penelope decided she wanted to join me right here at the end. So, yeah, not everything should be done for profit. And maybe a service like, well, service, yeah, right. But a function of the government like our prisons should be one of those things that is not done for profit. Let me know what you think in the comments, and I'll see you next time.